Hi everyone, and welcome to the June first time film watch video for 2023. And we're just gonna jump into whatever it is we're gonna talk about. I'm excited to bring this to you. The Road, which was directed by John Hillcoat, is a adaptation of Cormac McCarthy's novel, The Road, which he wrote in 2006. It was adapted into a movie in 2011, and I really like this movie because it feels to me like one of the more higher quality, really kind of painstakingly made post-apocalyptic movies that I've seen. A lot of times when you get a post-apocalyptic movie like, say, Mad Max or something like that, it's very well made, but a lot of the time they throw in a lot of style. It's a lot more fun, a lot more tongue-in-cheek. And with The Road, it's very much not like that. And I think that in terms of quality, this one is one of the better post-apocalyptic movies that I've seen that kind of takes itself seriously. You get movies like Book of Eli, which I've talked about in a previous video, where the tone is kind of serious and it's very dour and almost kind of bleak looking, but the content of the movie doesn't really match the style that it's going for. Whereas this one, it really does match for the most part of the style that it's aiming for. And I think that it does a good job of representing the dour, melancholic, almost hopeless nature of the book. And I really do think it's one of the best sort of direct from book to screen adaptations that I've seen that sticks with the source material. There's only a few scenes in this where they're obviously different or left out from the book, and I think that those were good decisions based on the content of what's in the book, because a lot of the stuff in there I don't think you could really get away with showing. I'm thinking of one scene in particular that involves a fire. One of the things I really love about this is the cinematography. I thought that the way it was shot was very beautiful, and it really does feel like they took a lot of love and care and effort into creating the visual style of this movie and the tone of it, and just getting across visually what they wanted the audience to experience. One thing I will say is that some of the pacing and the story beats get a little repetitive, and I think that's one of those things that doesn't necessarily translate that well from book to screen. With the book, it's a little different because you can set it down and you can pick it back up later, and it's one of those things where you read it intermittently at your own pace and you experience the story within the time that you want to experience it. Whereas this one, you're meant to watch it and see it in one viewing, sit down and take it all in at once. And obviously, I think when it comes to the story beats, it's not paced nearly as well because you don't get that sense of control over how you take in the story of everything. I also am not a huge fan of some of the music, and it kind of adds to that repetitive nature of it, where it's okay for some scenes, but in other scenes it kind of feels a little stale and it drags on for a bit too long, and some of it doesn't even really feel that fitting for what the world is. I like it when movies, especially movies of a more dour nature, are able to use either ambient noises or no music at all in order to convey the seriousness of what you're watching. And I think that this is a movie that would have benefited from implementing one of those sorts of things, where you take a movie like No Country for Old Men, which again is a Cormac McCarthy adaptation, and you look at that movie and you realize there's no music throughout most of the entire thing, and it's super effective that way because it adds to the tension of things. And I think that this movie could have really benefited from having that same sort of execution. All that being said, though, I really do enjoy this, and I think it's one of those where I'm not going to revisit it super often because of the subject matter and because the pacing isn't the best. But as far as post-apocalyptic movies, I don't think you can get much better than this when it comes to actually trying to take the subject matter seriously. And this one is an 8 out of 10 for me. Next up is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, which is the sequel to Into the Spider-Verse, and is directed by Joaquim Dos Santos, Justin K. Thompson, and Kenny Powers. I believe that's what, or it might be Kemp Powers. My handwriting is terrible, so You know, I'll look it up, I'll put the right one on screen, and we'll just go from there. But this is such a gorgeous film. I think it's one of the better animated feature films I've seen, and it's really just such a breath of fresh air compared to a lot of the Pixar and DreamWorks, and well, even DreamWorks came out with Puss in Boots: The Last Wish recently, which was one of my favorite movies of last year. Like, not even just animated movies, but just overall movies in general. I thought it was super well made. And the same goes for this one. I really think that the voice acting and the visual style and the story beats and the characters all come together and form this really intriguing animated movie that you're seeing. And I really do think that it's one of the best ones to come out this past year. I think it's made my top 10 best of 2023 list so far. So we'll see where it ends up at the end of the year, but I don't think it's going to get bumped off too much, really. One thing I will say, and this was a complaint a lot of people had when they first saw the movie when it was first released, is the sound design and the sound mixing, where a lot of the time it felt like the character dialogue was at war with the musical choices and the music audio, and that's something that I think they fixed later down the road, but when I first saw it, that was kind of an issue for me, where I could barely hear what the characters were saying over top of the loud, intrusive music that was going on. And I do really like the music. I thought the music in this was great, and obviously it's being memed to death with Miguel O'Hara's theme being spread all over TikTok everywhere, but sometimes it got a little too much, and I'm glad that they fixed it later, because that was a big issue that I had when I first saw the movie. But other than that, there's really not much else I have in the way of criticisms with this. I will say it is kind of harder to judge a movie like this. I've said this before, when you have an incomplete story, a part one of a part two, you really kind of have to wait until that last part comes out in order to really judge it as a film on its own. Like Dune or Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning, we just kind of have to wait to see how the whole story wraps up. And if it wraps up great, then cool, it makes the first movie better. But then if it fails to land, then yeah, it almost feels like the lead up wasn't worth much of anything. But I feel like they're going to do an okay job. Definitely not coming out in March 24th, 2024 like they thought. Like, I don't know what they were smoking when they said that that was going to be the release date for Beyond the Spider-Verse, but if they haven't even started the animation of it and the actors haven't even recorded their lines, there's no way in hell that's going to happen. But wrapping this up, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is a 9 out of 10. Fantastic animated movie. Jumper, directed by Doug Liman, stars Hayden Christensen, and it's got Jamie Bell in it and Samuel L. Jackson, and it's about people who teleport around everywhere. Hayden Christensen has these teleportation powers. He's able to jump from place to place, and the movie kind of shows you the implications of what would happen if that was the case. Kinda. This movie's not good. It is very dated, and I think a lot of it is just bogged down by cliched use of music and cinematography. Very ugly cinematography. Like, it doesn't really feel like it has much in the way of technical or visual style in any way. It feels very derivative of kind of like those superhero movies that came out in like the early 2000s, like Daredevil or Catwoman or Elektra, like that type of stuff, where it didn't really feel like it had an identity in its own. It just felt very derivative of those types of things. So it really doesn't have anything going for it in the way of technical prowess. Even the editing is super messy in this film. And it's not like the dialogue or the acting helps really at all. A lot of it is just kind of very stilted, very one note. It doesn't really feel like you're watching characters. It just kind of feels like you're watching these bags of meat jump around everywhere, and there's nothing for you to really connect to. The main character is kind of an asshole. He's not anybody to really side with. He just is kind of a selfish prick, which is fine if you want to portray something like that. But when the story is so heavily involved with you actually needing to care about the character, then I don't even know what the point of having the story be like that is, if you're just gonna make him an asshole anyway. Like, why would I care about what happens with this guy if he's such a dick, you know? I think Samuel L. Jackson does what he can. It feels like he's the only one in the movie who actually really cares about being in it, and you can tell he's such a good actor because he has that passion for, despite the fact that this movie's kind of trash. And I do like the concept. It's one of those films where the concept is more interesting than what we end up getting in the first place, kind of like that In Time movie with Justin Timberlake. This almost has a very similar feeling to that. I just wish they would have also used the concept of teleportation and the implications that that would have in our modern world a little bit more. Like, I feel like they could have gone so much deeper with it, and instead they choose to be super surface level, like, oh, he would teleport all around the world and see all the sights, and he would rob banks and blah blah blah. It's like there's so much more you can do with this, and you can be so much more in depth with the subject matter, but it just doesn't feel like they ever get that. So Jumper from Doug Liman, I'm giving a 3 out of 10. Yeah, it's not anything great at all. It just kind of sucks. The Island of Dr. Moreau, directed by John Frankenheimer. It's got Val Kilmer, Marlon Brando, David Thewlis. I love David Thewlis. I saw Naked recently, which was a film that kind of launched him into stardom, and that is absolutely his best movie. Go check out Naked if you haven't already. It's on Criterion. But The Island of Dr. Moreau, I'm glad that not many people think about David Thewlis when they think of this movie, because he's honestly the best part in it, and everything else just is so either without passion or just overall shitty. First of all, Marlon Brando and Val Kilmer, I don't know what Marlon Brando was doing, but he obviously wanted to just do his own thing and didn't give a fuck if it made any sense or not, because I'm pretty sure the vision they had for his character is not at all what it ended up becoming. And Val Kilmer, you can tell, just doesn't give a shit about being in the movie. He just straight up doesn't care. And I guess they had huge beef with each other on set to where they wouldn't even be on the same set at the same time most of the time. So shooting around that was very difficult, and it just, you can obviously tell it had an effect on the quality of the movie. Not that that was the only thing dragging the movie down. Poor costume design, poor visual effects, poor cinematography, no art direction really. Very derivative of that sort of like grungy 80s kind of underground tone. It almost reminded me a little bit of the live action Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies that came out during that period of time, and it's just very dated and really too corny for its own good. I'm fine with a little bit of corn in a movie, but it's got to have some level of self-awareness to it, and this movie doesn't feel like it has that at all, especially when you think about all the technical problems and the different production issues that they ran into when trying to make this movie. Like I said, David Thewlis is the best part. It actually feels like he kind of gives a shit about what's happening, but overall, I think he just probably wanted to wash his hands with this and just be done with it. And I think they had a whole entirely different cast when they were thinking about the making of this movie. Like, I'm pretty sure Bruce Willis was supposed to play David Thewlis's character at one point, but that just didn't end up happening, obviously. Good for Bruce. Not going to talk about this one too much. We talk about it on the podcast. Island of Dr. Moreau is a 3 out of 10. It's just not good. The next one is way too long of a title. It is Lost Soul, The Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau. Lost Soul, The Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau. That's 12 words. That's 12 words in the title of your movie. That's way too fucking long. What are you doing? This is a documentary showcasing the making and the different issues that they ran into when in production for The Island of Dr. Moreau. And this movie was directed by David Gregory, by the way. I don't think I mentioned that, but it is an interesting look at the process of making a movie like this. I think if you want something a little more in-depth and a little less subjective when it comes to making a movie, I would check out the beginning, making episode 1, Phantom Menace, where it shows kind of the fly-on-the-wall perspective of what it took to make the Phantom Menace. And I think that with this movie, you do get some interesting anecdotes. You learn quite a bit about what went wrong between Marlon Brando and Val Kilmer, between Richard Stanley and the studios, and when John Frankenheimer came in to take over directing. You do learn a lot about those things, and it's very interesting to get that information. What I would have liked a little bit more is the after reception of the film once it comes out, and the sort of cultural significance of that as a status of being a movie that's so bad that it's good, or even just a movie that's so bad. I don't even know if I'd say it's so bad it's good, because a lot of the times it's just not very enjoyable. I would have also liked to have known a little bit more about David Thewlis's process and his line of thinking when it comes to this movie, because the documentary barely mentions him at all. I think they mention him like one time, and I think it's for obvious reasons. He doesn't want to talk about this movie ever again. Like, he wants to wash his hands of it completely and utterly. But I would have liked a little bit of his perspective on it, because I think it would have just added so much more punch to this documentary and would have made it a lot more interesting to me. Hey, guess what? So halfway through, the video just cut because I'm a silly little boy and I didn't clear out the storage in my phone. So the rest of the video from here on out is just going to be a picture of the movie poster with my talking about that movie. This issue shouldn't be there next time. Hopefully this is just a one-time thing, but either way, hopefully you guys still enjoy. Anyway, back to the video. But nevertheless, it's not a terrible documentary. It's not bad by any means. It's pretty decent. I just would have liked a little more in the way of a variety of information about the making of this film. So this documentary, I'm not going to say the entire title again, just way too much. It's a 7 out of 10. Next up is The Flash, directed by Andy Muschietti, and I believe he's the guy who directed the newest It movies. And it's got Ezra Miller, Michael Keaton. It's got the booby Superwoman. Yeah, it's pretty epic. It's not. It kind of sucks. So first and foremost, what I want to say about this film is that it wasn't nearly as terrible as I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be much, much worse in terms of production or acting or dialogue. I thought it was just going to be a train wreck, especially considering all the shit that Ezra Miller has been doing the past, 2 years or so before this movie came out, which is just insane of its own. Just read up about Ezra Miller's problems before you continue this, I guess. Or if you're not that curious, keep watching. Freedom of choice, baby. But I didn't think Ezra Miller was terrible in it. They were actually, as far as acting goes and dialogue, one of the more intriguing parts to me. They were kind of annoying at points, especially when it comes to the young Ezra Miller, because there's two of them in the film. And I thought Michael Keaton, he kind of half-assed it a little bit throughout it, but at the same time, it's neat seeing that him playing that character. And I thought that, Superwoman, the actress who played her, I'll pop it on screen, I think she actually did a decent job and was probably one of the better acting performances in the movie overall. As far as issues, there's a lot of inconsistency because it has to do with time travel and parallel dimensions and parallel universes kind of crashing in on each other, and it's one of those movies where if you think about it even a little bit, it all starts to fall apart and it doesn't make any sense. Another thing I don't like is the CGI, the really bad special effects of this film. And it's funny because I guess the director, Andy Muschietti, has come out and said, oh, they look that way because of the way that the Flash runs and the way that the light bends when he's running fast, and the perception of reality from our point of view would be different because of the way reality bends in on itself. And it's like, what about the other scenes where he's not running fast and it still looks like garbage? What about that? Also, the structure is just all over the place. The pacing is really off in some parts. Like, they spend way too long in scenes where they're standing there as a group talking amongst themselves instead of things actually taking place. It almost feels like they're kind of trying to be Avengers in a way, and they're just failing at it, where the Avengers have those scenes of them discussing things with each other. And the pacing's a little bit better because they chunk it up a lot more consistently. In this film, it doesn't feel like they do that really at all. It just feels very haphazard. Another thing I don't really care for in this film is the fact that, and this is the case with a lot of different multiverse movies, is that a lot of them just feel like an excuse to call back to different films and different storylines and comic books and references. A lot of the time, multiverse movies feel like they're an excuse to reference something, especially when it comes to superhero movies. Just go back and, oh, look at this. You remember this? You remember that? Oh, this is a reference to this thing. Isn't that cool? Isn't that neat? Oh, Nick Cage was going to play Superman, and it never happened, but you get to see it a little bit in this movie. Mild spoilers, by the way. Nick Cage plays Superman for like kind of a scene, except it's not really him. It's a poorly rendered CGI version of Nick Cage, and it's just off-putting. But why would you give a shit about spoilers of this? Like, does it really matter? This is the last line of Zack Snyder's filmography being an influence on the DC universe. Like, why would you give a shit about this? It's not going to continue. It's not going to go anywhere. They're not going to go back and finish these storylines. They're going to completely abandon it, and James Gunn is going to restart the whole fucking thing because he's trying to revive a corpse of what this extended universe was going to be. So who fucking cares? Flash is a 4 out of 10. Whatever. We're moving on. Next up is Extraction 2, directed by Sam Hargrave. I believe he also directed the first Extraction. It is a Netflix action film that stars Chris Hemsworth, and the first one was successful enough, and I think it came out during COVID, so a lot of people were able to catch it on streaming, and I think it made a lot of money that way, so they were like, well, we get to make more. Hum diggity. What I do appreciate about these movies is that Sam Hargrave, you can tell he has a background in being a stuntman and a stunt coordinator for films, because the action in this is a really nice step above the typical action you get in Hollywood. All that to say is that the action is impressive, and a lot of the cinematic choices and the visuals of how the action is executed is really impressive. I will say with this movie specifically, and I felt like it was kind of a departure from the first film, the action scenes in some places were a little bit sloppier compared to other action scenes that take place later. There's an action scene that involves a train, and it's meant to look like one take and one shot, and it's very impressive looking, and I really enjoyed that sequence. That, in my opinion, was the best part of the entire movie. But before that, there's a prison scene where it's sort of like a prison yard riot, and Chris Hemsworth is fighting his way through all these guards and prisoners, and a lot of the time it's sort of that, oh, good guys surrounded by bad guys, but the bad guys are only coming at him one at a time, so Chris Hemsworth can beat them up like one by one after another. And a lot of the times you can tell that that's what it was, and they didn't really want to like fully commit to the action of it. They didn't want to take the risk to sort of put themselves out there and become vulnerable with the action in the scene that it calls for. So you can tell that they're a little apprehensive about like going all in with it, and it just takes it down a little bit from what the first movie was, in my opinion. I will also say that the son character brings this movie down quite a bit. The character writing is not good, but his character writing especially is just atrocious. You're meant to care about what this family's going through, and it's hard to when the son character makes all these stupid ass decisions and causes all of these issues throughout the film, and you just end up hating him. You just end up hating him as a character, and he's so stupid, and he makes the dumbest fucking decisions. Like, his character writing is just really terrible. Like, I'm not going to fault the actor, because the actor, I think, did what he could, but the writing and where they take the story because of his character is just so fucking brain dead. It brings the movie down quite a bit. All that to say is that it's pulpy, it's enjoyable for the most part. It's one of those films where I think you can just throw it on during a get-together or something and have people casually watch it for the action scenes, and it's got a little bit of a style going for it, and hopefully if they ever make more of these films, they're able to refine it and fully commit to the action scenes that they want to execute on. But Extraction 2 is a 6 out of 10. I do really wish that there was more to it, and a lot of it's very surface level. The character writing brings it down quite a bit, but a lot of the action is very impressive, and I do like Chris Hemsworth as the lead in this, even if a lot of the character writing feels very cliched and tropey and something we've seen a million times before, I wouldn't mind if we got more of these types of movies because the action is overall impressive. Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets by Luc Besson is a epic sci-fi movie, stars Dane DeHaan and Cara Delevingne, and it's definitely a movie. This one wasn't nearly as enjoyable as The Fifth Element. I thought The Fifth Element had a lot going for it in terms of character writing, world building, the environment, and the visual style. Whereas this movie, I do like a lot of the special effects. I thought for the most part they were pretty impressive, and the way that the world building works and how they interweave all these different alien species was really impressive. What really brings it down is the character writing and the acting portrayal. I think that Dane DeHaan and Cara Delevingne are so poorly cast in this movie, and you can tell that they wanted to go for a more like hot shot, like shoot from the hip kind of character for Dane DeHaan to play. He's almost supposed to be like a Chris Pratt type, where he's kind of devil may care attitude, who just does what he wants, kind of plays by his own rules, is a hot shot, and thinks of himself as a ladies' man. Whereas Dane DeHaan is not that. Dane DeHaan is somebody who looks like he should be playing a drug addict or a strung out fucking college kid, like a film student type kid, you know? He shouldn't be playing this like hot shot tough guy, you know? He does not pull it off at all. His character in A Cure for Wellness is way more appropriate for him to play than a character like this. And same goes for Cara Delevingne. She's supposed to be this kind of like rough exterior type character, and Cara Delevingne just looks bored the entire movie. And let's not forget Rihanna, because her character and her acting especially is just really fucking bad. I don't know what she was doing in this movie, but it really felt like she learned her lines that day and had no previous acting experience or rehearsal experience whatsoever. Like, it was really fucking stilted, and the way that they handle her character is just so laughably dumb. A lot of points in the story feel really convenient, and a lot of the things that happen as far as the overall story writing goes is just paced really weird. Some of it's interesting and some of it hooked me into it while I was watching it, but a lot of the time it just felt like it was very meandering and predictable. As impressive as it was to see the visuals and to see this world in Luc Besson's head fleshed out, it was also really just kind of an off-putting experience, especially considering that Dane DeHaan and Cara Delevingne look like siblings. Like, look up a picture of both of them and put them side by side and tell me one of them isn't like a copy and paste of the other's face. Like, you can't tell me that that's not the case, you know? Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets is a 5 out of 10. It's not the worst thing I've ever seen, but definitely not one that is going to stick with me. Dog Pound is a Canadian film that was directed by Kim Chapiron and is about these teenagers in a juvenile correctional facility and the kind of day-to-day that they experience as soon as they get there and the issues that they run into. They have to kind of survive the environment, and there's a lot of cruelty that goes around in it. And the way it's portrayed is really interesting because the visual style of this film and the cinematography almost feels kind of amateurish, but it sort of works for the type of movie that this is because it's very rough. It's very kind of fly on the wall, and it almost makes you feel like you're there with them, kind of experiencing what they're going through. And in a lot of scenes, that way of filmmaking is very effective, and I like the choices that they made overall with the visual style in regards to the events that took place in this film. I do like the lead actor quite a bit. I think his name was Adam Butcher. I think that's the actor's name, but I believe they just called him Butch in the movie. Like, that was his character's name. And I think that he was a really good main character to follow. And he's not necessarily a good guy. Like, he's a very reprehensible character, and he's arguably one of the more violent characters that you follow. But I think that balanced with the other types of characters, you get Angel, and then you get the kid from Degrassi, whose name I forget. I think he played like Spinner or something. Those characters are a good pairing for the main character because they kind of bring him down to earth and they keep him grounded. Whereas by himself, that character is very violent and vindictive and a lot of the time just very apprehensive. But I think that chemistry of characters works very well. One thing I didn't really care for was the music choices. I thought that a lot of the time it was a little too hokey for what the scenes were calling for and what was going on with the story. I also wasn't a huge fan of one scene in particular where it's the guy who plays Spinner from Degrassi telling a story about how he banged his girlfriend's mom. Thought that was a little much, you know, especially with the way all the kids in the hall were cheering about it. Like they were raging over this story, like in a good way, but like I don't know, it just felt a little cartoonish to me. This movie can borderline on being a little too melancholic and almost feels like misery porn at points, but I don't think it really necessarily reaches those levels. And I think that it does it just right in order to keep the story interesting. And it's one of those films where you follow the characters and the environment and they're dealing with everything around them, and then something happens and then everything just spirals out of control. And I really do think that is one of the more intriguing parts of the film, and I think they handle it pretty effectively for the most part. Not going to talk about this one too much. I recommend it. Dog Pound is a 7 out of 10. It's definitely closer to an 8 than a 6, and I believe it's also based off of an older British film. If I find out the name of it, I'll pop it on screen, so you can look that up and check it out if you want. I might check it out in the future. 2001: A Space Odyssey from Stanley Kubrick is it's a classic film. It's one of those films. It's a sci-fi film that I knew that I would have to check out eventually. It's one of those where I hadn't seen a lot of classic movies, and this was one of them, and I knew that I would need to check it out eventually because if you're a lover of movies, there's a certain amount of films that you need to watch, essentially, and this one, I think, was a big one that I was finally glad that I was able to watch. Yeah, it's very impressive. The visuals and the visual effects and the cinematography are all really well done, especially for a movie that came out in, I think it was 1968, something like that. And I really do like how this movie feels. A lot of the technical aspects are just really impressive in of themselves. Even the music and a lot of the more droning, abstract scenes that you get towards the end of the film are very enticing and intriguing and are really what kind of pulls you in and invests you in everything that's going on. At least it did for me. That's not to say that everything about this movie is, not dated or anything or simply timeless, because there are some things about it that do kind of date it, like a lot of the dialogue audio when the characters speak and the actors speak in the scene. You can tell that it's a movie that's from an older period of time, maybe not necessarily the 60s, but you can tell it's something that is not modern in any way, and the character and audio from that kind of gives it away. I also would have liked a little more in the way of narrative with this film. I know a lot of what this film goes for is almost strictly visual, and there's not a lot in the way of character dialogue or even a straightforward plot necessarily, but I do kind of wish there was just a little bit more to keep me intrigued and to keep me as invested as I would have liked to have been in this film. And I was invested for the most part, but it's one of those things where I feel like when you have a story like this, I need something more to kind of chew on in order for me to get something out of it. But overall, really impressive. Highly recommended if you're a fan of film. And it's one of those where the more I think about it, and if I ever watch it again, I'll probably get something different out of it. But for right now, 2001: A Space Odyssey, 8 out of 10. Great movie. Speaking of space, last but not least is Wes Anderson's Asteroid City, and this came out this past year. It's Wes Anderson's latest movie, at least of this recording. I know The Wonderful Life of Henry Sugar is going to come out soon, and I think that's going to be like a short film. I think it's only supposed to be like 40 minutes or something with Benedict Cumberbatch, but I saw this film in the theaters, and I was very pleasantly surprised that they had subtitles. I feel like the theater I go to never has subtitles for any movie, but I think this was a special occasion, so shout out to the Cinema Carousel. on Old Grand Haven Road. Very cool of them to have subtitles with this. It's a Wes Anderson movie. That is 100%, I think, the most accurate thing I can say about it. And if you know what that means, you know that you're going to get Wes Anderson's visual style. You know you're going to get his cinematography and his production value and the set designs. And the way everything is just framed is just really beautiful and intriguing and interesting. And I love the color grading and the color choices of this film. I think that for the vibe and for the tone that he wanted to go for, I think that it was exactly where it needed to be. Where I struggle with this film is the character writing and the character dialogue, because to me, with certain Wes Anderson movies, I think he perfectly balances that in juxtaposition with the set design and the cinematography and everything going on visually. And then in other films, I feel it can get really, really repetitive and grows stale quite quickly. Movies like this, like The French Dispatch, Royal Tenenbaums. I'm sorry for any Royal Tenenbaum stands out there that might be watching this, but I wasn't huge on that movie. Life Aquatic. Movies like that, where the characters all feel like they're written the exact same way and have the exact same cadence with each other, is something that grows stale with me really fucking quick. Movies like Moonrise Kingdom or Darjeeling Limited or The Grand Budapest Hotel, Fantastic Mr. Fox, those movies I feel like they have enough character writing variety and acting variety within those scenes and within that story to make those movies a lot more well balanced than something like Asteroid City. A lot of the time it feels like the characters are kind of meandering. Some of the dialogue is very interesting, and of course Wes Anderson likes to have that sort of tongue-in-cheek wit that is throughout every one of his movies, and I really do appreciate that. At the same time, I wish there was more in the way of variety with the characters in order for me to not lose as much interest as I lost when I was watching this. I watched this when I was in a very kind of tired state, and there were a couple points where I thought to myself, I could easily fall asleep if I wanted to with this film. Like, it wouldn't be an issue for me at all if I just dozed off. Obviously, it would have been an issue because I wanted to experience the film and I wanted to watch the whole thing, and I did, because we were going to talk about it on the podcast, and also I really do just in general like Wes Anderson a lot. But at the same time, with this one, I feel like I needed more in the way of character stakes and writing. And also what was weird about it too is that this is one of the only movies of his that have come out recently that doesn't have a sort of big crescendo ending. Even with a film like French Dispatch or Royal Tenenbaums, at least you get the sort of haphazard crazy chase scene or bombastic ending where all the characters kind of converge. This one, it feels like it comes out of nowhere, like there's sort of a scene like that, but then it just quickly cuts to something else and all the characters are separated again and they're doing their own thing, and it doesn't really feel like the movie leads into anything significant. It just feels like it kind of happens and then it ends, and that's where it is. And I think if you like that, that's fine. If you wanted something like that from this type of movie, then that's cool, but I think a lot of it just kind of falls flat for me. I know I've been complaining about this movie for most of this discussion, but I really do enjoy it. It's one of those where I need to kind of revisit it if I'm ever going to give it another chance at kind of winning me over, but I do recognize the really good qualities of it, like the visual effects, the music choices, the editing, the set design, even the acting performances and the characters were interesting at a lot of different points. It's just not a lot of it was able to kind of invest me into it. I do like Tom Hanks, and I do like Bryan Cranston and Jason Schwartzman, Adrian Brody, Edward Norton. Like, all those guys I thought were really good. Some of the actors I thought were relegated a little too much to too small parts. Like, Adrian Brody and Willem Dafoe are only in the movie for like a few minutes, and I would have liked to see more of their involvement in this film, because I really do think that those two actors were relegated to too short of roles. So wrapping this up, Asteroid City, it's a 7 out of 10. It's the same score I gave The French Dispatch, and I'm hoping that if I ever check it out again, maybe it'll win me over a bit more, but for right now, that's kind of where it sits, a little bit towards the middle lower half of where I have my Wes Anderson ranking, but overall not a bad film, and I don't think I've seen a film from Wes Anderson that I've absolutely disliked, and I've seen all of his movies so far, so I guess has yet to be seen. And that is it for the June 2023 first time film watches. Thank you guys for checking this out. The July video will be out 2 weeks from now, and hopefully I can get this edited and up on time for you to check this out on Sunday when it should be released, hopefully. I kind of have to edit this together a little quicker than normal because I didn't have as much time to put this together this past week as I would have. That, and I'm usually pretty tired after I get home from work, so the energy that I want to have when it comes to these is not where it needs to be in the time that I would like it to be, so hopefully that makes sense and I'm not rambling out of my ass. Be sure to check out the podcast if you haven't already. I think you guys would enjoy it, especially with Mac and I's chemistry. Our most recent episode that we released was going over Short Term 12 and Little Miss Sunshine. I think we have a really good discussion on both those films. And check out our Spotify and Apple pages. If you want to give us 5 stars on that, that would be awesome. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. That'd be pretty dope. Again, thank you guys for checking this out, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye.